I appreciate you being here. Hope that you are having a good day and a good week. Thank you for giving some of your time tonight. I know Wednesdays are a lot more of a challenge for many of us, just with children, school, work, so many other things. But I appreciate you being here as we go through our Wednesday night Bible class through the book of Exodus. And we're going to be in Exodus 25 tonight. So if you want to pull that up on your screen or on your tablet, or if you have that on, if you have your actual Bible, you can turn there to Exodus 25. That'll be fine as well. And we're going to look at the table of showbread tonight. Again, one of those that hopefully can make it as palpable for you, be easy to take, and maybe some application with it as well. Exodus 25. We'll look at the table of showbread in just a moment. Let's go ahead and have a word of prayer. Father, thank you for blessing us with this day and all the opportunities that came along with it, the grace and the mercy as well. We're thankful, Father, for all the people that we've come across, whether it's family, friends, co-workers, schoolmates, even just complete strangers. We pray, Father, that we left a lasting impression on them, that we were light and salt, that we planted a seed of kindness and gentleness, that we treated them as we would want to be treated, and that we loved them in the way that you have loved us. We're thankful for this evening, the opportunity to gather together in the middle of the week at this moment to study your word, specifically from the book of Exodus and the creation of the tabernacle among Israel, and how we can take some of these lessons, and as these are types and shadows in the Old Testament, they become realities for us in the New. We are thankful, Father, for your wisdom. We are thankful to you for your love for all of us, and that love being embodied in the Son, in your Son, Jesus Christ. And it's in His name we pray. Amen. All right, so just real quick, just to tie up last week, so we looked at the Ark of the Covenant. So this, again, I know the pictures don't do it very well, but you can just see how it is. We talked about it last week. It's not a very big wooden box, but it was the central piece of furniture for the tabernacle. And we talked a lot about the mercy seat on the very top, this covering, if you will. So you had the cherubim on either side. You had this mercy seat inside the box. Originally are just the Ten Commandments, a copy of the tablets that are in there, and just how God has mercy on us despite our failure to meet the demands of the law. So just the Ark of the Covenant in the New Testament. Not to spend a lot of time, but to put a little bow on it for you, if you will. Mentioned this in the prayer, but Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 1 tells us that all the things that we study, whether it's Genesis, Exodus, doesn't matter, they are all types and shadows of the things to come, of the realities to come. And we kind of think, what's more real than this? You know, I can touch it, I can kind of hammer on it. There's nothing more real than that, and the Hebrew writer says there actually is something more real. Is there anything more real than a box made out of acacia wood and covered with gold and has tablets of stone? And the Hebrew writer says absolutely there is. That these things are just types and shadows. And the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat is exactly that. Just a reminder, Jesus Christ is the Ark of the Covenant. He is the presence of God. John 1, 14 through 18, verse 29, He is tabernacled in the flesh. He wraps Himself up, and He is God with us, Emmanuel, God with us, if you will. The thing that I find most fascinating, and others have pointed this out with the mercy seat, is in John chapter 20 and verses 11 and 12, when the women are going to the tomb. What two individuals do they come across at the entrance of the tomb? Two angels. And if you read John's account in John chapter 20, there's an angel on either side. The last time we saw an angel on either side of something on the earth was the Ark of the Covenant, when you had two cherubim on that side. When Isaiah takes a view in Isaiah 6, he sees the cherubim surrounding and the seraphim surrounding God's throne. But on this earth, you've got two angels that are on either side of that. The communication is that the mercy seat is not just Jesus, but it's His resurrection. His resurrection is a new beginning. Mercy isn't just something that we're given now, and then we continue on in old paths and old patterns. Mercy is meant to bring a new beginning into our life. It's meant to be a new beginning into our spiritual life. Hebrews 9, 7 through 10 speaks of this. 11 through 14 does as well. And then Hebrews chapter 10, 19 through 25, it's one of my favorite passages. Because of Christ, He has opened a new and living way to God. Where the high priest goes through the curtain, meets God at the Ark of the Covenant, we go through Christ. We worship in Christ. He is our temple. He is our avenue. You just don't come into God's presence. You come into God's presence clothed with Christ. Clothed with His righteousness, clothed with His purity. Just wanted to put a little bow on that. That's just kind of tie that in because we finished up in a hurry last week. So we're going to look at the Table of Showbread tonight. The Table of Showbread is what it's normally called. So this is a little model. It's kind of what it would look like, zoomed in a lot, so this is not to scale. But you've got 12 loaves of bread, if you will, divided into stacks of 6. It kind of looks like the ark, doesn't it? You got the long poles right here to where it carried. You got the legs. Looks just like a table, but just this whole area right here, just like the mercy seat, is overlaid. It's covered in pure gold. And then it holds up the bread. And what this doesn't have on it, but you could read about it in Leviticus, is that these loaves of bread would be sprinkled with frankincense. And then they're out and they're provided on there, and we'll get that in a little bit more depth. This is an artist rendering of what that would have looked like. Still, you got the stacks, we kind of look at that like maybe it's like a pita bread. It's not a pita. I mean, you're looking at a big piece of loaf right here. It's about 7 pounds. Is what it would weigh when it's made. So just imagine that, you have to make 12 of those. So don't go to Walmart or your bread store and think, oh, this is the Table of Showbread. It's like a little pita bread. That's not it at all. It's just think bigger and a little bit thicker in that regard. Had someone ask me last week, what happened to all of these items in the tabernacle and later on in the temple? Where did they go? What happened to all of them? We don't have an exact idea where everything went, but we do have some historical aspect that may give us some insight to this. In AD 81, the emperor at the time, the emperor of Rome, his name was Domitian, commissioned this ark to be built in Rome. And it was to commemorate his brother Titus and his conquering of Jerusalem in AD 70. And it's called the Ark of Titus. And it just depicts right here on these scenes, and you kind of go around, it's got some things written in Latin, and then it has some of the murals right here. I call them murals, just the engravings, if you will. But if you were to zoom in on your next trip to Rome, because I know you're probably planning that, when you want, you can go by and see it. But if you'd ever get up close, you would see this. And this is when the emperor ransacked Jerusalem, burned and tore down the temple. They carried off all of these items as spoils of war. And why wouldn't you? I got a table made of pure gold. I've got a lampstand made of pure gold. I've got an ark made of gold and precious wood and other precious stones. What does that look like to you right there? That's your golden lampstand, most likely. That's your menorah, as we would call it. You barely make it out right here, but what does this look like? You've got what appears to be a leg, a table. It is very possible. Not saying it's absolute, but if this is accurate in any way, and wouldn't see why Rome wouldn't want to glory in her conquest, if you will. It's very possible at AD 70, when everything when Jerusalem is conquered and it's burned and all of that, we're going to take these items and we're just going to melt them and have the value of it. So if you've ever wondered where these items went, what happened to all of these items, the Ark of the Covenant would be separate and apart from this. But all these other items, these basins, these jars for oil, this golden lampstand, this maybe perhaps the Table of Showbread, where do they go? When he conquered everything, took it all with him. That would tell you, I know this is just a little dip of our toe in the deep end of the pool. You've probably heard that the Temple Mount and rebuilding the temple, there's a certain denominational thought that Jesus will come back, 1,000-year reign, he'll reign from Mount Olive, he'll rebuild the temple. You've heard any of that? If all of that is going to happen, then all of these items have got to be recommissioned and redone. Because God will say more than once, you must build it according to the pattern that you have had and that I've given you. Not just the tabernacle, but there are instructions on how to build the furniture. So you can't go bigger, you can't go smaller, you got to do it. So you got to do all of these things. But if all of that's going to be rebuilt, then you got to keep all of the law. You got to go back to all of the old covenant, not just bits and pieces. And that's kind of a drawback for that thought. So if you got friends or family that may think in those terms of 1,000-year reign and the rebuilding of the temple and the Dome of the Rock's going to go away and we're going to have all of these other things perhaps, then these would have to be commissioned. But I just thought you might find that interesting. And someone who asked me last week about that, where did all of these go? So this table of showbread, it's called the bread of presence. It's also called the bread of the face of Yahweh. It's also called the bread of piles. I like that one. We just got a pile of bread here. Let's call it something. We'll just call it the bread of piles. Continual bread. It's called the bread or the table of continual bread. It's called the holy bread. And this, by the way, is the bread when David comes in and he's asking the priest and he says, I'm hungry. Do you have anything to eat? And the priest says, all I have is what? All I got is this showbread. And the law said you don't feed it. You don't give it. The only ones who have access to this are the priest of God. And the high priest is the only one who can touch it. He's the only one who can handle it. And yet, the high priest gives some to the king. Interesting. It's just an interesting discussion. When you look at the table and its dimensions converted to our just perhaps feet, 3 foot long, 1.5 foot wide, and just roughly around 2 foot tall. So how big is this? How big is this piece of furniture? It's not big at all. Well, you get in the theme. It's pretty interesting, isn't it? That the Ark of the Covenant's not very big. It's not very tall. It's not very wide. The same with the bread. You would think all of these things would be big and majestic, and it's not. I'd still like to have a table in front of me overlaid with gold that would still capture attention, whether it's 3 foot high or 30 foot high. But it's still fascinating to me in this deep dive. I didn't realize how small all the furniture was until we get to the lampstand, perhaps. Did you know that this is the first time the term table is found in the Old Testament? It's the first time the term table is found in the Old Testament. You go hundreds of years, perhaps. Thousands of years, perhaps. And this is the first time a table is mentioned. I don't want to read too much into it, but I like the fact that the first time a table is mentioned, the Lord is present at the table. The Lord is there. There are 12 pieces of bread and 2 piles of 6. Just off the top of your head, what do you think 12 represents? 12 tribes of Israel. It's made with unleavened bread, and you can look in Leviticus 24 where instructions are given on how to make the bread. Again, the Lord leaves no detail. Here's how you make the bread. Here's the exact measurements I want you to have. If you compare these measurements in Leviticus 24 and Leviticus 25 to the picking up of manna in Exodus 16, you have the same exact weight. The same exact weight that Israel was supposed to pick up in Exodus 16 with the first picking up of manna, the first provision of manna, is the same exact weight that God commissions. When you make the bread, it will be the same exact weight. That's fascinating. What does that tell you about our God? He is consistent. What did you say? He's a God of detail, but consistency is also there as well. It's made fresh every Sabbath. Every Sabbath it is made fresh. So the old is replaced and it's given to the priest so that they can eat it, and the new batch is provided. Bob, you're raising your hand.
That's just one of many places where it's very specific.
Yes.
And that's what he expects of us.
Mm-hmm.
To be what he expects of us, how he's defined us to be that way.
Yeah, the specific. And again, once you get into the New Testament, all of these material, these earthly details, if you will, the details of what we're supposed to have in our life: compassion, love, forgiveness, the giving of mercy, loving your neighbor, and other things. Those are specific things. You can't argue with the specificity of be compassionate, be kind, share. He just goes in another way. Made fresh every Sabbath. Again, once every 7 days, you've got a new batch. And why do you think that's the case? Besides mold, why do you think that would be the case?
It's a renewal.
Okay, Sabbath is going to be a renewal. You're going to rest. You're going to do all of this. But the image would be is that God does not need to rest. So even when man is resting, even when humanity is resting, God is busy at work on behalf of man. But then the other is a renewal. It is going to be a renewal of the promise. It's going to be a renewal of what it represents. So go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
So take that to the New Testament. So like every 7 days we're taking communion.
You're
So
getting
do you
it.
think there's
Oh, yeah.
I think God was relating?
Absolutely. Bailey's sermon a couple weeks ago when he talked about with communion, there are a couple of things that he highlighted, and he mentioned this other in passing, but it is a renewal of the covenant, and we'll see this in a moment. Every first day of the week, we gather at the Lord's table, and we renew the covenant. And it's not him renewing it with us, because he never breaks it. He is faithful continually, no matter what. It's us that need to renew our commitment. And it's us that need to renew our allegiance to him. But we do it based on who he is. And so this is what the table represents. So hold that thought, Beth, because you're on to something with that. God's presence. God's presence. It's always, if you look at what God does, God likes to, when something significant happens, God has a meal with someone. The first one you have is Genesis 18 and 19 with God and Abraham. God makes a covenant with Abraham, and then God has a meal. There's a kind of this aspect of a meal, if you will. Well, it's the same thing that happened. You remember a few weeks ago when we restarted this study in Exodus 24, Moses, Aaron, and the 70 elders go up in the mountain. They meet God, and they eat and they drink. And it takes place after the covenant. Israel, they come back down. Israel agrees to it. The covenant is formed, and instantaneously there's a meal. There's a Passover. And then you have this table now that will always be in the presence of the Lord that is a reminder he made a covenant, and it was sealed with blood, and it is a reminder through a meal. That's the idea. That's kind of your pattern, kind of your overarching pattern. So a covenant is made, and then you're followed by a meal. Well, Beth, you were alluding to it. What does our Lord do? Right before he goes and he's the Passover lamb, what does he do? He has a meal. And in that meal, he repurposes all of it. All these types and these shadows. And instead of the blood of a lamb, instead of just simple bread, he takes all of this. This is my body, this is my blood of the new covenant. And he establishes it with his death. And of course, his resurrection does the same thing. And every first day of the week, we gather together for a meal. It's not just a cracker and a cup of juice. It's a meal to remind ourselves we are renewing that covenant. Every time we are renewing that covenant, we are remembering that God entered into an agreement with us, and we entered in an agreement with him. But the only way we did it was that something died. And in our case, it wasn't a something, it was a someone. Everything comes back to the death of Christ. God and Israel have fellowship. That's part of the purpose of this. That the table of showbread isn't just the fact that there's just this fancy table and it's piles of bread. God and Israel are in harmony. They are in fellowship. They are back where Adam and Eve were before the fall. Your meal and mine with the Lord on the first day of the week is a reminder that you and I and he, we have fellowship. We are in step. We are in harmony with him. Every first day of the week, we are reminded through blood and through bread that is given, this is what it takes for me to be in harmony. This is what it takes for us to be in harmony. And then Bailey emphasized this point as well. But Israel needed to know this. the 12 pieces of bread are not scattered throughout all of the place. They're in one location. Israel doesn't just have fellowship with God, they have fellowship with each other. They're in tune with each other. They're united together. Communion is a reminder that we are in this together as well. That where each one doesn't live to his own. And we need that reminder because in a society that highlights being an individual and living to myself, that every first day of the week I don't live to myself. I'm a part of something bigger. And that bigger is the church. It's the kingdom. Not everybody's an ear. Not everybody's a hand. Not everybody's a finger. Not everybody's a leg. But everybody is a part of the body. And every first day of the week, we are reminded that we are part of it. Are we diverse in our gifts and our talents and our abilities? Absolutely. But are we together? Yes. And why? Because 2,000 years ago, a man from Nazareth died on a cross, was buried, and 3 days later he came back to life. That's the table of presence. That's what the table of showbread is for. Any questions? Any comments? All right, so it also is about provision. You've probably heard that most of the time, anytime you've discussed it, has been about provision. Why does Israel need to know that the Lord is the source of everything? Why does Israel need a constant reminder that God is the source? Because it never goes away. Never goes away. Sarah?
Well, when they're entering the promised land, God tells them, he says, you know, when you're living in houses you didn't build, and you're eating and drinking from vineyards and orchards and fields that you didn't plant, and you get fat and happy, be careful because you're going to forget about me. You're going to forget that I'm the one that gave all this to you.
Yeah, you will. Bob?
Just thank you.
We need to know who to be grateful for. So you're right. One is that she needs to be reminded because she'll forget. And then the other is you need to know who to be thankful for. It did. Yeah. And throughout the Chronicles and throughout the Kings, they did. The further you get from God, the less grateful and thankful you become. And of course, the more forgetful you become. But think about that for a moment, that Israel needs to know, and this is just something for us. In a time where we pride, you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. And there is nothing wrong with hard work. Don't mistake what I'm about to say as being apathetic or lazy when it comes to work and to life and all of that. I don't think you will, but just at the same time, tell me one thing today that we did that the Lord didn't help with. Just one thing today that you accomplished. Just think for just a moment. What is one thing you did today that the Lord wasn't the source of whatever it was? Did you breathe without Him today? Did you get up without Him today? Did you eat without Him today? Did you fill up your car without Him today? There's something that we're thinking in our minds that sometimes we think we're so independent. And the reality is you're not independent. Now, did you get up and go to work and be responsible? Yeah. Good for you, and continue to do that. You have children, bring them up and let them to be responsible. But what is one thing that we did, any of us did, at this moment and said, I and I alone did that? No one. We all were given a gift by God. Everybody. He is the source of that. And because He is the source, God provides. When Israel had nothing to her name, He provides. What's going to be different in the Promised Land? You mentioned this. What's going to be different in her journey? So Exodus 16 becomes an example of this. Manna from heaven. He is the source. So gratefulness. One of the reasons why we practice thankfulness and gratitude is so that we can remember. It forms a barrier. Go ahead, Justin.
Source of all good things
Yeah.
that could happen. But if God's not the source, you can do things that are, so Satan's the source.
Yeah.
Of wickedness, or whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, if God's not the source, well, something might be the source.
It is, and that's what Israel, so you're right, you make a good distinction there. That it's not just all things in terms of just life, breath, or what have you, but then the things that we may actually participate in. So if I gave myself over to jealousy today, that isn't of God, right? So that's a good distinction, and James would echo that. Every good and perfect gift comes from the Father. No, I know, but that's a good reminder, though. No, that's a good reminder, because we would look at it and say, well, just kind of cast a wide net, which is again why God cautions them. If you forget, it's not that you go into an empty space; something fills you. So how did judges, you mentioned the judges a second ago, Bob, how did they become where they were? They left the good things and, of course, all the other things that God mentioned. Yes, ma'am.
I get so excited thinking about all this stuff, and I just want to say, I believe that my manna might not look like that manna, but I believe that God being the source and the way He provides and everything in the Psalms, and I just know that as long as I depend on Him and I know He's the source and I thank Him, I know I'll always get manna if I have to have it. It may not look like that manna, you understand what I'm saying? It might be somebody on the side of the road handing me a loaf of bread. It might be, but the whole thing is, I'm just so excited when I think about how my whole life He's provided. He's always provided, even before I knew Him like I know Him now. I can look back over my whole life because I always tried to talk to Him. And before He brought me to where I am today, I know for a fact He has always provided.
Yes, and that is why it's called a continual bread to a certain extent, because it doesn't matter what day it is, it doesn't matter what's happening, He always provides, and it's important to remember that. Yes.
Israel, they were doubting whether or not God was listening to them, so that played a big part in it too.
They did. There were times where they doubted. Or
that they know not to stray away from Him because He's always there.
they did. That is correct. That they would struggle with that doubt, and they would struggle with other things as well. Very quickly through some of these things when it comes to this, and I want to look at John 6 in just a second. God's presence in the New Testament. It's the bread of presence. It's in the presence of Yahweh. What city or what town is Jesus born in? What does Bethlehem mean? House of bread. There are connections. You look, it's not just the city of David. It's the place of bread, the house of bread. Unto you is born in the city of David. Right? You've got, and it's not a thing again. It's a person. It's God Himself. So Matthew 1:23, you shall call Him Emmanuel, God with us. And then He's born in Bethlehem. Shepherds go see Him and all of that. Jesus is God's presence, and He is also God's provision. Bethlehem means house of bread. And I pointed this out before, but it's so good to be reminded of this. Matthew begins his gospel with, you shall call Him Emmanuel, which means God with us. And it ends with Jesus saying, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. The whole gospel is bookended with, I am God, and I am with you. And the whole thing about from that moment is how is He God? Why is He God? Can I trust Him? And then He's saying all of this. And then He's resurrected, and His very last words are, I am with you until the end of the age. I am with you. Israel had the constant reminder, whether it was an Ark of the Covenant or a table of bread or a golden lampstand, God is with you. Everything is condensed into one person. He is our table of bread. He is. You mentioned our manna may not look the same tangibly, it may not, but it looks the same for everybody who follows the Lord. It's Christ. He is your table. And that table never runs out. That table is always full. That table will always provide. The table it never runs dry, it never runs empty. you run dry, I run dry, you run empty, I run empty, but he doesn't. So go into his presence. That's the amazing thing with this. I want to look at John chapter 6, if you will. And this becomes the big discussion for Jesus. And this is just going to be a quick summary. So it's, as always, I'd encourage you to read everything that's there. I don't know. I think some people take this as a reference to communion. Not sure if that's the case or not. I don't think it is, just simply because he points to himself, and there is no institution of communion, though probably wouldn't hurt if you wanted to look back. Jesus is on going back and forth. He feeds the 5,000. And in John chapter 6 and verse 5, Jesus looks up his eyes, and seeing a large crowd was coming towards him. And Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread?" If you were a Jew, and you're reading that, you know where to go. Your mind would go all the way back to Exodus. Israel is out of slavery, but they're not in the promised land. We're in the wilderness. We don't have anything. Jesus looks at these people who are following him, perhaps coming out of darkness, spiritual darkness. Where are we going to find bread? What are we going to do for them? Notice in verse, so Jesus, what does Jesus do for them? Do you remember the story? What does he do for the crowds? He feeds them. With what? Bread. Little boy's lunch. You remember specifically what it was? 5 loaves, 2 fish. 5 loaves, 2 fish. Interesting. Actual bread. And not only does he have enough to feed them, does he have leftovers? If you're a Jew, you're paying attention, you know your story, all of these things are getting connected. This guy's pretty special. He can do something. He's providing. I wonder who provided for us in the Old Testament. I wonder who was always there continually, no matter what happened, providing. This guy's doing the same thing. And then he crosses over, and in verse 26, I like this one because Jesus kind of chides him a little bit, and it's a good reminder for us. We'll make this applicable. So verse 25, the crowd finds Jesus on the other side, and they said to him, "Rabbi, when did you come here?" And Jesus answered them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you are seeking me not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of loaves." Somebody just reinterpret that into some contemporary language for me. What did Jesus say to him? Okay, you're not here because you are really looking for something deeper. You're here because your belly's full. And you know I can do that. That's pretty... that's not the compassionate Jesus I know. But we need that Jesus too, though. We need that one. Because it makes me stop and reevaluate, why am I following him? Am I following him just simply because he's constantly doing? What happens if he stops doing? Am I following him because I'm getting something out of this? Because my belly's full and fill in the blank with whatever? Or am I in it for him? Because right after this, he's going to call himself the bread of life. Notice what he says in verse 32 and following with this. He says, our fathers ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. Verse 32, Jesus then said to them, this is the crowds, the same crowd, the 5,000 plus. "Truly, truly, I say to you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." And they said to him, "Sir, give us this bread always." The light's starting to come on. And then he says this in verse 35, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst." You don't have to wait for Sunday to get full. You don't have to wait for a Wednesday night to get full. Yes?
Also, it's easy to trust God in the good times.
Mm-hmm.
But it's harder when, like Job, it's harder for us to have that mindset where he's covered in boils and he's sitting on the ash heap and he's scraping his skin with broken pottery, and his wife's going, "Why don't you just curse God and die? Everything's gone." And he says, "You're being a foolish woman. Naked I came, and naked I'll return. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Because even when we are at our lowest, he still provides, because he doesn't leave us alone. And sometimes, Bob Lowry, who was a very dear brother here for many years, once said, sometimes you have to be brought low before you can be raised up. So
Amen.
maybe that's part of it.
Oh no, it is tuning them into life. Life is far beyond what you think it is at this moment. And that's the thing for us. I mean, today there were numerous times where you were faced with what's life? What is it? Is it the mundane? Is it the repetitiveness? What is life? And so many are looking for a thrill, so many are looking for an experience, all of us, and there's nothing wrong with it. The issue isn't in looking at those things. We should have those moments. The problem is that we're looking to them to be the sole source. And he's the source. I am the bread of life. I am your bread. I am your source. I am your sustenance. This is what I am. Am I that? And is Jesus that to me? Is he that for us? And then, of course, everybody leaves because it's so hard. Eat my flesh, drink my blood. And I like what Peter had when Jesus looks at him. It's one of those times I don't think Jesus has a crisis of doubt, but he does legitimately wonder. In verse 66, after this, many of his disciples turned back and no longer walked with him. So Jesus said to the 12, do you want to go away as well? And Simon Peter answered him, Lord, to whom will we go? You have the words of eternal life. They get it. Where are we going to go? Who are we going to go to? There are some things that will give us that, but they'll run out. The experience comes to an end. The temporary things come out. What are you living on? Why is it that we run on fumes more often than run on a full tank? Why is it that we find ourselves doing things? What is the table of presence in your life? What's the bread? What are the good and perfect gifts that are from above? Beth, you mentioned this again, communion. 1 Corinthians 10 and 11 is called the Lord's Supper. It's called the Lord's table. And do you know that in Revelation, we get a picture that we'll eat in heaven? I know we kind of think table and all of that. You know there's a table. It's a marriage supper of the Lamb. I think the aspect of all of this as we bring this to a close is just quite simply is what is it that you're looking to provide for you in your life? What is the source for you and your family? What is the source for us? Are you looking at your own wisdom, your own knowledge? You're looking for your own strength? You're looking for your own answers? What is life without God in it? You mentioned Job. You got Solomon that just runs every experiment under the sun that is without God. He finds a temporary source of whatever it is that he's looking at. But at the end of every chapter in the book of Ecclesiastes, he comes to the same conclusion. If God's not in the picture, it's all in vain. It's all vanity. If God is not my source, if Jesus is not my source, if he is not the perpetual bread that I eat from, if he is not the one that I constantly thank and praise for being the source, no wonder we run on empty. No wonder we're more agitated and aggravated. No wonder the devil finds more room and space in our heart and our mind. No wonder he preys on our weaknesses. Because the table of presence, the piles of bread, they're the ones that I created, not the ones he created. The admonition that I have for you tonight is if you've been looking somewhere else, even if that someone else is you, stop. And go to the one who is there every single day. He does not grow tired. He does not grow weary. He never runs out. I am the bread of life. And he who eats of me will never hunger again. And he who drinks of me will never thirst again. That's the table of showbread. Hopefully it was a good reminder for you. I'm glad you're here tonight. The class is yours.